Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from across the JCU community and beyond. I'd like to welcome you to the 5th edition of JCU's Conversations with Alumni series, and the first for 2021. My name is Growden, and I'm a proud alumnus of James Cook University and a former staff member of the Alumni Relations team. While I've now moved on to a new role as founder and CEO of LiteHaus International, which is a non-government organisation bridging the digital divide across Australia and Papua New Guinea, I am absolutely thrilled to be able to continue hosting these panel sessions once every 2 months, featuring some of JCU's extraordinary alumni in discussions about the most pressing matters of our time. JCU is a place very close to my heart, and I love being able to continue meeting some of its more remarkable products, motivating change across the world. So I do look forward to moderating this insightful webinar. However, before we continue, I wish to acknowledge the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first inhabitants of this country, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners and elders, past and present, of the land on which JCU conducts its business. In the spirit of reconciliation, I also acknowledge the valuable contribution that Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples continue to make to James Cook University and the broader community. Well, to all of our alumni in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. As always, our list of registrants highlights the global span of our alumni community. Throughout this series in 2020, we were joined by alumni in 58 countries, from the Pacific Islands to Congo, all the way out to the Arctic Circle. And again, we certainly have a global audience befitting one of the most important and pressing global issues, and that is that of the precarious balancing act of life on our planet. Earth is home to more than 7 million plant and animal species, but certainly since the beginning of the agricultural revolution, one of them has had a staggeringly disproportionate impact on the fortunes of the others. Scientists have named various points over the last 12,000 years as the beginning of an Anthropocene, an era characterized by this immense human impact on the Earth's ecosystem. Now, since 1960, the human population has exploded to almost 8 billion, threatening biodiversity, ecological resources, and the balancing act between our planet's various inhabitants. To provide some critical insights into these trends and what the future holds for the world's biodiversity in light of seemingly incessant growth in human population and activity, I'm thrilled to be joined by a very astute and experienced all-alumni panel, which we are honoured to have comprising 3 distinguished graduates of JCU. As I have remarked throughout this series, in particular last year, as an alumnus of JCU myself, I count myself very proud to be amongst the same group as our esteemed panellists who joined us this evening, and indeed all of you in the audience doing wonderful things around the world. So let me begin by introducing our panel. Firstly, I'm delighted to introduce Nina Jensen, who graduated from James Cook University in 2001 with a Bachelor of Science, majoring in marine biology and biological oceanography. Nina is currently the CEO of Rev Ocean, a game-changing initiative that has an ambitious yet simple goal to ensure one healthy ocean. A tireless champion of promoting environmentally responsible solutions for the world's oceans, Nina's appointment in 2018 at Rev Ocean follows a decorated 12-year career of positive impact as the Secretary General of the World Wildlife Fund in Norway. With burning commitment and passion for the oceans, conservation and sustainable solutions, we're thrilled to have Nina joining us here from Norway to contribute a valuable input into the discussion. So Nina, it's such a pleasure to have you joining us here today from afar. Welcome.
Thank you, Jack, and it's such a pleasure to be here. I really look forward to our conversation today.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, me too. And so next we're pleased to welcome Arthur Chapman, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Australian Biodiversity Information Services. Arthur graduated from James Cook University in 1973 with a Bachelor of Science, majoring in botany and chemistry, and worked as a technical assistant at JCU before moving into a truly remarkable career in environmental modelling. Working as a scientist with the Environmental Resources Information Network, Arthur developed and built the Australian Plant Name Index database, eventually moving into the position of associate for 12 years. Since 2002, he has been the CEO of Australian Biodiversity Information Services. Arthur has modelled the natural environment in countries as far apart as Madagascar, Bolivia, Armenia, and Taiwan. And we're thrilled to have him share his insights into how the ecological balance of our world has changed throughout his career. So welcome, Arthur. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us from Victoria.
Thank you, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. And last but by no means least, we're truly privileged to have Professor Jamaluddin Jompa, or as he likes to prefer to be called Jamal. Joining us from Indonesia, Jamal graduated from James Cook University in 2003 with a PhD in science and has gone on to become one of Indonesia's top scientists and arguably the country's best in marine and environmental science. He is currently the chair of the Centre of Excellence of Marine Resilience and the Dean of the Postgraduate School at the Hasanuddin University. His early scientific work on coral reef processes has been influential within the international marine community, and his recent research continues to push the boundaries of innovation, knowledge, and application for marine and coastal resources. Jamal shows exemplary leadership across Indonesia's scientific community, engaging with policymakers and those who implement programs by brokering knowledge between science and strategy. So welcome, Jamal, and thank you so much for joining us for this session from Makassar in Indonesia.
Thank you, Jack. It is a great pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you to all three of our panelists for joining us. I think we certainly have a high caliber panel to take us through this session, exploring the interrelationships between the Earth's various inhabitants. Now, just to our audience, should you have any questions you'd like one of our three panelists to address, please do not hesitate to pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will endeavour to get them answered probably towards the end of the webinar. So without further ado, let's begin. Nina, I want to start with you. Firstly, a big congratulations to JCU on a quite extraordinary career to date. You've been a great champion of sustainability for the world's oceans. And I was hoping that you could sort of set the scene for us by offering a bit of an insight into the history of conservation, both within the marine sphere and more broadly. I mentioned earlier that this discussion will focus on that balancing act of flora, fauna, and humans. So when did we really truly start to realise our impact on the world's ecosystem? And has this realisation at all stemmed the tide of the detrimental effect on the fortunes of the Earth's fauna?
Thank you for that, Jack, and a really important question. And I think, increasingly all over the world, it's becoming evident the dramatic impact that humans are having on the planet. But of course, some of us have been focusing on this for quite some time, and not just in the recent decade. So WWF, as an example, was founded in 1961. So they've obviously been doing quite a bit of conservation work and been concerned about the development for more than 50 years. And unfortunately, despite this, and despite a lot of organizations putting in a ton of effort to stem the tide and reverse the trends, we're not seeing that at the moment. According to WWF's Living Planet report, which in many ways takes the pulse on the planet and explores the state of biodiversity and wildlife on this planet, we've lost almost 70% of wildlife on this planet since the 1970s. So no doubt our relationship with nature is broken to a massive extent, and we really have a huge job to do in terms of reversing these trends. The good thing is, of course, that increasingly people all over the world are seeing the dramatic impacts that this is having on human life. We're now surrounded by pollution. Deforestation is evident all over the world. Overfishing is having its toll on fish stocks and on our food supplies. I mean, we're seeing it everywhere and also in our everyday lives. So hopefully this increased awareness will help us turn the tide on this important issue and put us back on track.
Yeah, thank you, Nina, for setting the scene. It is a rather grim one, as you mentioned, but it's wonderful to have a bit of positive sentiment, as you just mentioned there. So thank you very much. And Arthur, I will move to you now. You've been studying plant biodiversity from a data and analytical perspective for essentially the entirety of your career. Could you also set the scene for us in terms of the trends that you've witnessed in global biodiversity? Perhaps you could use the start of your career as a historical marker. Have we seen a significant decline in biodiversity despite growing environmentalism globally, as Nina mentioned? And if so, could you potentially identify particularly critical areas of concern?
Thanks, Jack. When I started out with my career, computers were at their very beginnings, and I've lived through some massive technical changes that have improved the way we go about studying biodiversity. We've seen computers become mobile, we have access to resources worldwide through the internet, and we have software tools that allow modelling to fill in some of the blanks in our knowledge. I remember an American scientist visiting us at Erin in the early 1990s, discussing some of these issues. The US has a large population and it's spread fairly evenly throughout the whole country, whereas we in Australia have a much smaller population and most of the institutions and people are around the coast. It was the early days of remote sensing, and I asked the American what happens when you see something interesting from remote sensing and want to check it out. He said, we just call up one of our 21,000 field officers and ask them to go and check. My response was that in Australia, we can't do that. We may have to drive for a week just to get to an area. This is why we developed environmental modelling techniques in Australia, and we have been world leaders in this field since the beginning. And we can use climate and other environmental attributes along with species distributions to fill in the blanks in areas where it's difficult to get to or where our knowledge is poor. Look at a map of Australia's collections, and in areas of low population, you can see a good representation of the road network. Other major advances that had slow beginnings in the late 1980s and early 1990s was scientific collaboration and the sharing of data. Advances in databases and in networks that permitted the rapid transfer of data allowed the world to bring massive resources and data into one area and allow researchers access to this data. Currently, for example, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility has over 1.6 billion records, museum and herbarium collections, as well as citizen science observations. And in Australia, the Atlas of Living Australia is approaching 100 million records, currently 94.7 million. This data allows us to better document biodiversity and to monitor its health and decline, but we have a long way to go. Since I began my career, we have seen a major loss in biodiversity, not only through species extinctions, but also biomass loss through clearing, overexploitation, both terrestrial and marine, and climate change. For example, the recent loss from Australia's bushfires. 25 years ago, I prepared 2 reports for the Australian government on the effects of climate change on threatened species and species of significant environmental significance. Very little has been done following those reports. It has been frustrating as politicians of the world have been slow to react to climate change. In fact, in many countries, and especially in Australia and the USA, climate mitigation has been despite government rather than because of government. The last part of the question on the critical areas of concern with respect to biodiversity decline could take all day to answer. Suffice to say that our difficulties began with human transmigration and a mentality of domination of nature rather than working with nature. So briefly, I think the most critical areas are the increase in human population, the continual pursuit of economic growth, and of course, climate change. We must learn to work with nature and not try to dominate it.
Thank you, Arthur. I think look, that's that last sentence there really hit the nail on the head, I think, and certainly sets a wonderful scene for the conversation that we have ahead. So Jamal, as I'm sure Nina would attest to as well, without a doubt, one of the most crucial biospheres on Earth are its oceans, and they cover a shade over 70% of the Earth's surface. As somebody hailing from the archipelago nation of Indonesia, and equally one of the country's finest marine scientists, could you perhaps follow suit with Nina and Arthur to sort of set the scene for us? What is the present state of the world's oceans, and what are some of the greatest challenges facing marine life as a result of ever-increasing human activity, as Arthur mentioned, within them? Sorry, Jamal, you just need to unmute yourself there, sorry.
Okay, thanks for that. Before I answer the questions, I just wanted to re-emphasize that I think we were just reminded by COVID-19 tragedy, where actually without understanding the planet called the Earth, where actually we are part of these ecosystems. And when we fail to behave as a part of the ecosystems, and we are actually the one who suffer from the tragedy. So I do hope that these conversations will bring a lot of value, not only talking about other part of the world, outside the human, outside us. They are not really an object of science, but we are part of this phenomenon. We are part of this biodiversity. So we really need to be wise and strategic in managing this flora, fauna in this earth. Back to your questions. It is quite contradictory and we a little bit frustrating sometimes when the whole scientists, especially marine scientists, acknowledge that the center of marine biodiversity with a lot of theories, center of overlaps and anything, you name it. The reality is that we are the center of marine biodiversity, but indeed it is not being translated to the daily life of people in Indonesia yet. We are struggling actually. We try to create a policy brief, and we actually produce a books just to translate that the biodiversity means a lot, not only for the number of species, flora and fauna living in this earth, but they are part of actually our life. And so Indonesia, for Indonesian biodiversity status, you know, frankly speaking, this is not very good news. Yeah? Both on the earth, on the land, and also more especially on marine. We have data shows that, for example, our mangroves actually has been degraded up to 70%. Our coral reef has been degraded heavily, maybe up to 75 to 80%. And that's really a very sad story, given that actually this is supposed to be a part of our life, to live together in harmony and translate these potentials for human beings, to live with them and also to get gain economy from this. If you see the Indonesian overlapping between west and east, actually biodiversity goes from west, you know, low biodiversity, to the east, high biodiversity. But the reality is that also the poverty exactly the same pattern, which is the poor people live on a higher biodiversity, and that's become more challenging. How to really maintain this biodiversity, as you ask, and the same time improve the poverty, you know, reduce the property. So a lot of challenge, of course. We're still struggling with over exploitation of this biodiversity. And especially in Papua, for example, which is what we call the bull's eyes of biodiversity. So really the center of all marine life biodiversity, with many names and beautiful names. For example, the most important refugee for marine life, and you name it. But in reality, they are actually poor people living there with activity, including over-exploitations and sometimes destructive fishing. And on top, we have climate change. So I think the global society, and hopefully also JCU alumni from all over the world, you know, can help this center of marine biodiversity not only look into this number of species and the value of this biodiversity, but also people around it, so that we can make them harmony, living together with you know, but then can benefit for both. And I think I will leave it to audience to figure out how do we you know, tackle this issue. We have been trying our best, but of course we still need a lot of information, science, and also help from many group of people, including maybe JCU alumni in the future. That's all, Jake, for now.
Yeah, perfect, Jamal. Thank you very much. And I think it's really interesting the way you know, you described human beings as being part of this ecosystem that we talk about, and certainly part of its biodiversity, and how you attach the sort of emphasis on livelihoods. I guess it's very common in the developing world, you know, for people to be relying on the environment around them directly attached to their livelihoods. So thank you very much for that response. Nina, it would be remiss of me not to turn to you now as we discuss the present situation of the world's marine life and oceans. So this session is all about flora, fauna, and humans all together sharing the earth. And its fundamental question is, how can the seemingly meteoric growth of human population, industry, and activity transform to become sustainable. The WWF itself suggests that almost 3 billion people depend on seafood within their diet, and as Jamal mentioned, of course, within their livelihoods as well. There's about 50,000 cargo ships crossing continents at any given time. So would you be able to build on Jamal's remarks and explain what impact this is having on our oceans?
Absolutely. And first of all, I think the most important point is that the Earth actually has enough resources to accommodate its current population. The major problem is that we're wasting our resources in a massive way and not using it sustainably. As an example, more than 1/3 of all of the food that is being produced is wasted. And that is happening at the same time with more than 700 million people going hungry every single day. So of course, there's a complete mismatch between the resources, how we're utilizing them and how we're distributing them. So that is a major thing that needs to be looked at going forward. And to Jamal's point, I think the key thing is that our relationship with nature is definitely broken. We're not living in harmony with nature, we're not respecting it, and we're not fully understanding the important role that it plays in our lives. We've somehow placed ourselves above or apart from nature when we're actually an integral part of nature and totally reliant on it for having good lives. You know, without functioning ecosystems, we will have no oxygen to breathe, we'll have no food to eat, we'll have no building materials, nothing to develop our economic system around, and understanding this fundamental basics is absolutely essential. In doing that, I want to also bring in a key point from what Arthur was saying, and that is the role of data. Because we are living in a time when information is maybe overloaded to us, but we have a lot of information available in terms of the state of biodiversity, what is impacting it, how it's mismanaged, and of course, how it can be resolved. But making sure that this data and information is being put to good use, that data is combined in new and meaningful ways, and of course, most importantly, put in front of decision makers to make sure that they're making the right decisions and not just decisions based on the wrong facts is of course critical. So one of the things that we've done in RevOcean is to launch a global ocean database or data platform, if you like, which in many ways has a goal of being a platform of platforms, combining all the different databases and data sources that exist for the ocean today, and make this readily available for decision makers, for scientists, for NGOs, anyone from all over the world for free. And we've started already, uploaded together with NOAA and IOC UNESCO as two examples. We've uploaded more than 220,000 data sets from 220,000 research missions since the late 1800s, and data that previously took maybe days or weeks to access can now be accessed in the matter of seconds. And it also provides us with a more holistic picture of what is actually happening in the ocean. How is climate change impacting it? Where are the most heavily impacted areas? Which areas should be prioritized for protection? What is the state of the current fish stocks? Who's responsible for managing them, and who's responsible for fishing them? How can this be improved? What are the solutions out there that should be scaled up, and so forth? So I hold huge optimism for the future that we actually can do something about it, but it really means that we need global collaboration, we need open and transparent sharing of data, and we also need a better, in lack of a better word, call it a global accountability system where businesses and governments are held accountable for delivering on the targets that they've agreed to, and also making sure that we're treating nature with the respect that it deserves.
Yeah, fantastic, Nina, and that sounds very, very exciting. I think something that I would like to explore as the conversation progresses is sort of that relationship and the intersection between data and research and policy and decision making. So that will be interesting to get to. Arthur, I'm going to move to you now. You've spent a significant amount of your career studying biodiversity in the developing world, and we were chatting offline just a little bit more about that. Now, Jamal was talking about overexploitation of resources in a part of the developing world. As developing countries have striven to sort of catch up almost economically, for want of a better term, often they've turned to environmentally degradative activities such as logging, overfishing, and industrial agriculture. So throughout your career, have you noticed a subsequent impact on biodiversity as a result of these trends, particularly sharply in the developing world?
Yes, Jack, indeed I have. Again, some of this has resulted from trying to dominate nature rather than working with it. And too often European concepts of nature were introduced, and many of these just don't work in tropical countries outside of Europe, or where 4 distinct seasons are a myth. The idea that the only way to conserve nature was to create conservation areas that were set apart was often not possible. Often these were in areas that Jamal mentioned, in areas with little value for urbanisation or agriculture, and were thus unrepresentative of biodiversity management of these areas, and the management left a lot to be desired. The issues that have risen from these practices are many. Perhaps I can elaborate with an example from Brazil. Subsistence farmers lived within the rainforest and grew many varieties of yam under the shade of the rainforest with good humidity and low light, perfect for the growing of yams. Every 2 or 3 years, they would move to another area and the rainforest regenerated. Quite a sustainable method of farming that had worked for many generations. And similar systems have worked in many developing countries, I know particularly in Papua New Guinea. Then the government decided to conserve these rainforests and lock them up, no more sustainable agriculture. What had ended up happening was the farmers now had to grow their yams out in the open, under irrigation and in full sunlight. Not the best conditions for yams. As a result, the number of varieties under cultivation went from around 70 or 80 down to 1 or 2, with massive loss of biodiversity and genetic variation. And I did a lot of work in some of the developing countries on trying to in situ conservation of the wild relatives of crop plants under a climate change regime, so that we were trying to conserve as much of that genetic variety as possible. As you mentioned, to catch up economically, many areas have turned to logging and to clearing for agriculture. One just has to look at the Amazon and the Mata Atlantica forests in Brazil, logged and cleared for cattle, soybean, eucalyptus production. I'll leave overfishing to the other panel members who are much more competent than I to discuss. And another example of the need to maintain sustainability and to move away from monoculture agriculture is in Ghana. In Ghana, burial sites are sacred, and small pristine forests are retained around those sites. These small forest areas are often surrounded by monoculture agriculture. And it was found that the health and productivity of the crops declined at a distance from those forest areas and dropped off significantly from that distance. It was eventually determined that the drop-off began at the distance a bee can fly from its nesting site and hive areas, and that beyond that distance, pollination was just not taking place. One solution was to plant more forests around the agricultural areas and along roadsides, and to allow weeds to remain along those roadsides to provide nesting sites and off-season food resources for the bees. Decline in biodiversity is occurring more rapidly in the third world than elsewhere, and most mega biodiverse countries in the world are in the tropics and belong to the developing world. Managing biodiversity in those countries while trying to improve living standards is a challenge that can't be achieved using traditional first world techniques. Managing big game in Africa, biodiverse rich rainforests in South America or Asia, or even crocodiles and kangaroos in Australia, not to mention the vast marine resources, is not the same as managing a forest in Europe or deer in America. We must change our thinking to match the circumstances, the climate, the local landscape and traditions, and learn to better work with nature, not against it, and be sustainable, and look at techniques that have been used by many of our first world nations people around the world.
Yeah, look, thanks, Arthur. I think that's a wonderful little segue into what I'd really like to ask Jamal. So Jamal, really keen to hear your thoughts on the undeniable impact of human activity and growth upon the natural world, particularly as Arthur mentioned in the tropics and in that developing world sphere, because Indonesia really does provide a fascinatingly relevant sample for this discussion. Arthur, you used the word before of mega biodiverse. Indonesia was actually named one of the 17 mega biodiverse nations on the planet by Conservation International. But at the same time, it's also simultaneously the world's fourth most populous country, teeming with 270 million people, all striving to improve their quality of life. So Jamal, would you be able to share your first-hand insights into this giant balancing act and how it's manifesting into policy and reality in your country?
First of all, I'd like to thank Nina by mentioning that the planet actually is enough for all people to live with, but then we just need to behave and maybe enforce the regulation and manage resource and the people at the same time. Of course, this need a lot of science and data to be able to help the government to really provide data or science-based policy, especially in the context of Indonesia, as you mentioned. In one hand, we are, highly populated country, number 4 in the world, and biodiversity actually we claim, it's up to you guys whether you agree or not. But combine the terrestrial and marine biodiversity, actually Indonesia is number 1. Of course, the Amazon is number 1 for terrestrial, but the ocean around it is not as rich as Indonesian marine biodiversity. So combine the Indonesian archipelago, terrestrial and marine, actually that's really number 1 in terms of number of species, both flora and fauna combined, and also other organisms. But on the other hand, actually, we are struggling as an environmentalist and marine scientists and even like forest scientists. We just need to find a balance. We just need to be able to provide food for the people. And of course, this is not going to be traditional from nature. As you know, Australia need to have a lot of agriculture and aquaculture. And I think as Arthur mentioned, this actually on one hand will reduce biodiversity. And I think we just need to be able to really get the balance, to protect some of this country biodiversity in specific area. So the zoning plan actually one of the key to be able to arrange this balance, and also the use of area for different purposes. So Indonesia now is starting to really aggressive in what we call marine area conservation, both in marine and on terrestrial. Indonesia tried to improve the size and effective management of marine conservation from 20 million. At the time we call it 2020, 20 million hectares in year 2020, but now we're aiming for more, 30 million in the year of 2030. It is quite ambitious. We didn't believe at the time that we can achieve 20 million, but this is all about really trying to protect the balance, create the balance and protect critical habitat and marine biodiversity. But on the other hand, we develop technology to be able to develop sophisticated and precision agriculture and aquaculture. So we don't need to, dump a lot of fertilizers that eventually go to the coastal area, and we don't need to cut all the mangroves in order to create aquaculture for brackish water ponds, for example. So so we need to maintain this balance to optimize biodiversity protections on the in the same time to enable the country also to grow economy. And sometimes I talk to my colleagues from developed country. Look, if we consider this earth belongs to everybody, so we really need to help Indonesia to be able to protect this, not for Indonesia. Biodiversity is for the earth, for this planet, and only one planet, we call it Earth. I actually would like to call this planet an ocean, yeah, because 70% actually is covered by ocean, yeah. But anyway, the English term already called planet, this planet is Earth planet. And this is, again, belongs to every one of us. So I do hope that this discussion will bring some kind of new perspective. This is all our responsibility, not only for Indonesian responsibility to protect the biodiversity for Indonesian, but this is actually the biodiversity for the earth. I think I didn't answer your question yet exactly, but I do hope this help a little bit, that we try our best to balance. In the context of aquaculture, for example, we're still struggling. For example, Indonesia developed a seaweed, you know, but the seaweed can need to be developed in the coastal area. And in the coastal area, we have coral reef, we have seagrasses. So in short term, we cannot say that you better protect the seagrass and corals for you to have economy, because they don't feel that tangible economy compared to, for example, grow a seaweed. No, so growing seaweed, immediately they can get revenue, they can develop economy. So this is something that we need to be able to find technology and also maybe appreciate and put more value for the price of this seaweed, for example, so that they don't need to grow seaweed too much in order to protect some spaces for coral. That kind of arrangement, of course, is not easy, because this is a global market. This is something that beyond any countries to protect this global chain, global value chains and markets. So, but we need to be positive that we need to find a way, especially against for this newly experience. For 1 year, we are struggling to live with this new normal because our ignorance. And I think this is what we call blessing in disguise, maybe, that we need to be able to put this as a very good lesson to change our behavior toward this issue. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, Jamal. And I'm so glad that we did raise the point here that this is a global issue that requires global ownership and a global response. So we just had a question come forward in the Q&A regarding how do the panelists feel about the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Are they having any impact? Why or why not? And just, I'm not sure if the audience can see in here, but Nina was just saying, you know, that protecting and restoring nature starts with our kids. I think this SDGs as a framework have played an important role in getting more people, corporations and governments focused on sustainability. However, we are a long way from reversing those trends. And you know, Jamal, I'll go back to your points there where you were saying, I'm not sure if I've exactly answered your question. At the end of the day, there's no easy answers to these problems, and that's why it requires a global effort for us to be able to address them. So on that point there, I would like to shift this discussion towards solutions. So our Conversations with Alumni series is concerned not only with identifying and discussing the great global challenges of our world, but also crucially, how can they be combated or solved? So Nina, I'm going to cross to you again. You've spent your entire life essentially as a tireless campaigner and actor within the environmental sustainability space. What do you think holds the key to reducing the horizontal impact that us humans are having on our fellow occupants on the planet? And what is the most important battleground, in your opinion, for the pursuit of sustainability?
Thank you. So first of all, I think we need to understand our fundamental impact on nature and, of course, its intrinsic value for our lives and how essential it is to have a good future. So getting that basic understanding across is essential. And of course, bringing it back to the question in the Q&A, bringing it to our kids, making sure that they're grown up with understanding how important nature is and that we actually have to protect it rather than focus on restoring it once we've broken it. And we really cannot afford to lose any more nature than we've already lost. So we need to protect what is left. And I also think that it starts with understanding that nobody else will solve this problem. It's up to us. You know, we can't just say that, you know, that's the government of Indonesia or, you know, this company in Norway has to resolve it. It's all of our responsibilities. So it starts with ourselves, making the small steps that we can in our everyday lives, but then also making sure that we're electing the right politicians in office, holding them accountable, and using our power, for example, our purchasing power when we're buying products, only choosing sustainably produced products. In terms of battlegrounds, I think the most important thing is shifting investments. You know, at the end of the day, what causes the majority of the problems stems from money and economic profit. So we're slowly seeing a positive shift where investors are, for example, moving away from fossil fuels and increasingly into renewable energy. And this is, of course, essential if we are to stop the global climate crisis and reduce our emissions. So we can and we must move towards 100% renewable energy. And that can only be done if investments are shifted away from fossil fuels and into developing more renewable, sustainable energy. So holding investors accountable, making sure that, you know, universities, corporations, our pension funds are all invested in sustainable activities and asking the right questions in terms of how the money is actually being invested plays a critical role. And one of the key things that I was involved in my time in WWF was getting the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is the largest wealth fund in the world, to divest from coal. I think that's one of the biggest climate decisions that have ever been made, and a practical one where you're actually pulling money out of a very harmful practice and then shifting it towards more sustainable energy sources. So shifting global investments is one. And then secondly, it's improving regulations and holding governments accountable. You know, we keep going to these international conferences and meetings. We're now up to COP26. You know, how many more meetings do we want to hold before we're actually doing the right things? You know, the data is crystal clear. We know what we have to do. And we keep flying around the world, meeting up to set new targets, but then we're not implementing the solutions to reach those targets. So we need some form of open and transparent global accountability system where companies, investors, and governments are held accountable for reaching those targets and for the activities that they're undertaking that have a massive impact on this planet. I think if we're able to do those things, shifting investments and holding companies and governments accountable, then we've come a long way. And finally, of course, at the end of the day, it is all up to us, and we can't just rely on somebody else solving it. So we need to take small steps, each and every one of us, in our daily lives. And that goes from anything from removing single-use plastics in your everyday life, choosing only certified sustainable seafood, reducing your meat consumption. All of these things are simple steps that each and every one of us can take, and that will have a very positive impact at the end of the day.
Fantastic, Nina. It's great to end on such a positive note there. And I think it's very interesting how there's an interrelationship clearly between economics and environment. And, you know, I think that certainly holds key, as you mentioned. Arthur, I'm going to throw to you now. As humanity's command over biotech grows stronger into our children's generation, and science develops ever more sustainable farming methods, which we did mention a few of those just previously, could there be room for optimism throughout the 21st century in terms of, with less land cleared, could we not only see a reversal in the decline of biodiversity, but perhaps one day growth?
Thanks, Jack. That's a difficult question. I wish I could see better into the future. First of all, I'd like to back everything that Nina said in her last session there. I think she's hit the nail on the head in a lot of that. But humanity's command over biotech can have both good and bad results. Some of the past bad results have led to monoculture, overfishing, rapid land clearing, which has led to a loss of biodiversity. If we use some of those biotech solutions wisely, however, then yes, there are benefits, and we must be very discriminative in the way that we use them. Also, increasing biodiversity per se may not be necessarily a good thing. It depends on what you're calling biodiversity. Introduction of weeds into pristine areas may increase the total number of species in an area, but is that a good thing? The planting of monocultures may increase the biomass, but lead to species decline. So the planting of trees is great, but we must be careful to plant the right species. And to do that, we may have to look at provenances that will survive a changing climate. Also, we must stop planting single species in straight lines, but look at planting species that will create new and sustainable ecosystems. We've consistently tried, just an aside there, it's just been noted that there are 19 threatened or ecosystems in decline in Australia at the moment, and they cover everything from marine to terrestrial. We've consistently tried to alter nature to make it conform to our own wishes. We need to change our thinking and begin to work with nature as equal partners. As been mentioned, we're part of that nature. Otherwise, sustainability will never be achieved. I'm an optimist, and I do see gradual change to greater sustainability. Small steps often, but they are a start. The move to more sustainable farming methods, for example, some of these new methods take us back to the lessons of the past. Traditional stock management over large parts of Australia, at least the better rainfall regions, farmed stock in small paddocks and only moved them infrequently from one paddock to another. Stock ate out the paddock completely before being moved on. This led to soil compaction, areas of high nitrification around overnight campsites, compaction tracks leading to water points, and increased weed growth. The need for the addition of fertilisers, especially for growing alien species and weedicides to control the weeds, etc., resulted in high nitrification and reduction in soil microorganisms, leading to long-term degradation both of the soils and the biodiversity. Soil grazing, for example, does just the opposite. Stock are moved daily, meaning they spread out evenly across the paddock, and there are no long-term overnight campsites and no compaction tracks to the water points. This has proven to lead to less soil compaction, growth of native grasses, improved microorganism diversity, a decline in weeds, and improvement in weight gain for the stock. A win-win situation, which also includes greater sequestration of carbon. This is largely a reversion to how the way shepherds have operated for thousands of years and continue to operate in areas such as the High Caucasus. We can learn a lot from those that have lived with nature for thousands of years, Australian Aborigines and others. The transmigration of Europeans that I mentioned earlier introduced alien types of agriculture and species to large parts of the world, areas that were not suited to the farming methods that worked in Europe, with its even rainfalls, small farms, 4 seasons, and rich soils. And this is just one example that leads me to the optimism that's working from the grassroots up. The other area is in the increase in citizen science and the massive use of people across the world to help science and help us to understand nature. And it's not only citizen scientists working with citizen scientists or scientists working with scientists, but citizen scientists working with scientists to work together. And a very good example of that is in the monitoring of the regeneration of the bushfires in eastern and southern Australia, where scientists are working with citizen scientists and gathering a lot of data where the scientists can't get to on a regular basis, but it's outside somebody's back door as a citizen scientist. So these things really do make me optimistic for the future, but we have a long way to go.
Excellent, Arthur. Thank you very much. And look, I totally agree with you in terms of solving global problems. Actually delving into grassroots knowledge sources is just so important. And yeah, really appreciate your optimism at the end there as well. Look, we are running a little bit low on time. So Jamal, I do want to turn to you and I want to ask you that difficult, simple question again, and I do apologize for that, but how can the significant population of Indonesia live harmoniously with their environment while simultaneously advancing their economic circumstances and quality of life? Because that's pretty well been a recurring question we've had throughout this session. I'm going to throw to you, and I just ask you to keep your response to 4 minutes to solve all of the world's problems in 4 minutes.
Okay, because of the limited time, I will go with the very fundamental aspect, which is actually understanding, knowledge, science. Without that, I don't think we can change the people mindset that, you know, you need to protect this, you need to protect that, because they're thinking and they are facing the reality of life, that they need this money, they need this fish right away. They cannot wait until the size. So we need to make them, so the key there is education. And of course, as Nina and Arthur mentioned about accountability, the people need to be educated well. We as scientists need to work better in translating science into public language. And you know, the problem now is a lot of informations, you know, all around, hoax, a lot of them. Sometimes we cannot even like put the truth and the valuable information into this horrible number inundated informations. You know, Indonesia is one of the best users of this information. So we struggling now to put this science messages to make really Indonesians smarter or better understanding of some of the issue, including what we are talking about. How do we live in harmony in making sure the Indonesian people get rich, you know, to be a developed country, but at the same time we protect one of our comparative advantages. We need to be proud of this biodiversity, not only because of the numbers, but it's the key to live in harmony. This is the key to live healthy and happier. And I think, as Nina mentioned, there is no way of making the government and you know, and investors not to accountable for these potential problems. So we need to really work together, and we need to put the science really on top. So I hope, you know, James Cook University and their alumni, we all share a lot of you know, past, you know, and I do hope we still wanted to share a lot of knowledge and information to be able to really help solving this problem at the very fundamental, which is understanding the problems well, and so we can really work together to find a solution, and making sure that everybody is accountable to solve this problem, especially for the investors who might be able to get a lot of economy, but not not very accountable, sorry to say, for protecting this biodiversity. And also for the local and small scale farmers and fishermen, they need to also understand this nature is not limitless. No, we have struggled for making them change their mindset, because they have this local kind of wisdom that, you know, the ocean is limitless, and so does the fish. So again, I think the key answer for your very difficult question is knowledge, science, and accountability. And I do hope that we can work together and trust each other's in solving this problem, and global action, because climate change is coming and it's going to really ruin everything that we are doing without global responsibility on climate change. Well, sorry, yeah, Jack, for my...
No, thank you very much, Jamal. That was a terrific response, I think, to a impossible question to answer. You mentioned knowledge, you mentioned accountability and collaboration. I think that's been the recurring theme from all panelists for solving this issue, because at the end of the day, it's an issue that belongs to every single one of us on the planet.
One more, Jack, very last one. the value of biodiversity need to be put into appropriate level and understanding, because the problem is without understanding the intrinsic value of biodiversity, not only for short term but long term, you know, the source of medicine, source of anything, you name it, a lot of them, including environmental services. And I think by knowing that, I think we will appreciate more of this nature in terms of our kind of personal or human benefit. Yeah. Thank you.
No, that's an excellent point, Jamal. Well, look, we are running down on time, unfortunately. So I would like to say thank you very much to all three of our esteemed panelists who have taken the time to give our alumni community a really interesting, insightful, and I found optimistic and rather passionate commentary of the ecological balancing act between all the inhabitants of our planet. The time to act really is well and truly upon us on this issue. So it's been such a privilege to hear your informed and experienced insights into some of humanity's greatest questions here tonight. So look, in wishing all of you the best for the future, this does conclude tonight's Conversations with Alumni panel session. We do have another one planned for early May as well. So to all of our alumni out there, make sure you're keeping up to date with all of our email communications. There will be an invitation to that sent out shortly. And thank you to the close to 1,000 alumni who have joined us from right across the world for these sessions since they began in the middle of 2020. And thank you all for listening. Wherever you are around the world, we wish you, our JCU alumni family, many safe and happy returns until our next Conversations with Alumni webinar in May. So on that note, I would say good night and best wishes.